down. 1 2 1 2 1 2.
All right. And do you know how to like export this after?
What's that?
Do you know how to export this and everything?
Liz is gonna do it.
Okay,
I'm
cool.
just gonna save
Cool,
it.
cool. Yeah, literally just
Probably
save
saves
it
itself,
and,
right?
And
Probably.
you're good to go, and then just stop
Yeah.
this. And
Yeah.
Good, man.
Yep. Okay. All right. I can start.
Yeah. Yeah. Let me just get here.
Sure.
Okay. Good evening, everybody. Welcome to Live from America podcast. Hatem, our co-host, is sick. He's been sick for a couple weeks.
Son of a.
I don't know what's the matter with him, but I hope he'll be back soon. But I could not bear to cancel because we have a guest who I'm very, very, very excited to have on.
Yeah.
When I first heard about Dr. Professor Wax, when I went to University of Pennsylvania Law School, by the way. I'm an alumni. Yeah. I graduated class of '87. Gary Francione taught me torts. You know Gary Francione? And Gorman taught me contracts. Schulhofer taught me criminal law. I don't remember the rest of the professors. Anyway.
And he's retained none of those lessons till this day.
I was going to say, you remember their names.
I remember that. Yeah, I don't remember much.
That's pretty good.
So I'm going to, anyway, Professor Amy Wax is the Robert Mundheim Professor of Law at the University of Pennsylvania Law School. She was the subject of heated media debate over her recent article titled "Paying the Price for Breakdown of the Country's Bourgeois Culture." And when this issue came across my desk, I sent it out to everybody I know. I was this is important because we are free speech fanatics here. We own a comedy club. We're always worried about this. But I have a lot of ideas about it. But I want to let you. You want to explain the controversy?
How long do we have?
We have as much time as you need. You want an editorial in the Philadelphia Inquirer?
Wrote a editorial with my.
You got to come a little bit closer to the mic.
With my co-author Larry Alexander, who's a professor at San Diego, and actually he was the one who instigated, shall we say. He said, "I have this idea for an op-ed. Do you want to write it with me?" I said, "Well, show me a draft." He showed me a draft, and I said, "Well, I don't like this, and I'd rather have that." So we ended up writing it together, and then we tried to place it, of course, and we ended up, long story short, placing it in the Philadelphia Inquirer.
And the nutshell of what the editorial said?
It really has two parts. I mean, the first part talks about the importance of bourgeois values, so-called bourgeois values, and we list a few of them. I'll get to that in a minute. And we postulate that many, not all, but many of the problems that we see around us are due to a decline in bourgeois values, that not enough people, not enough of the time, are adhering to, sticking with this script of bourgeois values. And we actually look back to the 50s as a time when more people did practice the bourgeois values, but even if not all of them did, and of course not everyone ever has.
Can you tell? I'm afraid people listening won't know what those values are.
They are values like thrift, responsibility, prudence, working hard, continence in the sense of only having children after you get married, trying to stay married for the children's sake, being patriotic, being considerate and civil, little things like not using profanity in public, being respectful of others.
Neighborly, civic-minded, charitable.
Right. Neighborly, civic-minded, charitable.
That's Dov Davidoff, by the way.
Yeah.
Temperance, which means moderation in all things.
And
it goes into great
Eschew
detail.
substance abuse and crime, and you bring up the opioid epidemic. I mean, yeah.
Sobriety.
Sobriety.
Sobriety is actually on the list.
And these were the secrets to our success as a nation, as a culture.
They helped.
They helped.
They helped a lot.
And they're at the root of our what seems like our decline in so many ways.
Well, I think one of the points is that more people used to pay obeisance to those values. They truly believed that they were important and worthwhile, and they aspired to them. They posited those values as the ideal to which they should aspire, even if they sometimes fell short. So there was a kind of unanimity, a common norm, shall we say, about the value of bourgeois values. So that's why we look back to the 50s, because we think that that was more the case in the 1950s, definitely, and that we've lost some of that. And certainly our elites are embarrassed to embrace the bourgeois values or recommend them to anybody else. Now, the irony is that, and Charles Murray has brought this out very well in his book Coming Apart, which is really a masterpiece, where the people in charge, the top 10% or 20%, the people at the top exemplify those values very often or more often than the people at the bottom, but they refuse to preach what they practice. And of course, because they practice these values, they do a lot of the things on the list. Their lives go a lot better. It's part of their privilege. In fact, they've sort of a self-conferred privilege. So we talked about that. And then we sort of segued into a broader point, which is that not all cultures are equally valuable. In other words, if you're going to embrace bourgeois values as some kind of superior script for life, that means you're necessarily making a judgment. You're making a judgment that other ways, other paths, other practices may not be as adaptive, may not be as pro-social. And we gave some examples of that. We started out by talking about Plains Indians and how, their practices, their habits, their outlook on life may not be terribly adaptive in 21st century technocratic America. It was fine then, but it's not fine now. We talked about the whole kind of acting white, rat black culture, which is in many ways dysfunctional, keeps people from getting ahead. And then we talked about some of the bad habits that working class white communities have fallen into.
Hillbilly Elegy. Have you read that? Have you seen it?
Yes, it was sort of a hillbilly elegy story in
really
800
interesting.
words.
Yeah.
So we tried to pack all that into 800 words.
And you said something about one evidence for this was that the migration of peoples is basically from the non-West to the West.
Well, that was in an interview the next day.
Okay.
That actually was not part of the op-ed.
Okay.
What happened the next day was some sophomoric University of Pennsylvania student who I agreed to give an interview to my dismay. I subsequently rued that decision. Asked me some callow question like, how can you praise bourgeois values? That's praising whites, Europeans. That's embracing colonialism, some dumb thing. You can't say that whites are superior. I said, well, I can say that European culture is superior, and Europeans are mainly white at this point. I said, look at the evidence. I was kind of exaggerating. Everybody wants to go to countries ruled by white Europeans.
Right.
And essentially what I was saying is, if you look out in the world and look at the patterns, examine the patterns of migration, what you observe is that people are not getting on boats and risking their life to go to Zimbabwe and Yemen and Malaysia, and
of course,
they're not.
Rule of law, rights. What are the European?
Well, I mean, the whole economy. I mean, how about non-malaria seeking? There's a lot of reasons.
No, but
there are a lot of reasons, but I think ultimately people say, well, they're going there because these are affluent countries. They have a very robust welfare state. And then I just ask them, but why are they affluent? Right. Why are they orderly? Why are they peaceful? Why do they have low crime rates? Why do they have a robust welfare state that's stable? I mean, you can't just tell me that. You have to give me
Are there civil rights? Is civil rights originated by European culture and basically only exist in European countries?
Well,
Real
civil rights are really Anglo-English. They're Anglo-Protestant.
And they
they
spread through Europe. They have them in France, I suppose. I don't know France that well, but
well, Europe. I mean, I think they really sprang up in many centers within Western culture, within Europe. But I think we've been the leader. The British. I mean, if you really know anything about legal history, you know that all of the traditions of rule of law.
Well, what I'm getting is that why would somebody have a problem with saying that our culture is superior when we value civil rights so much and we look down our nose at any culture that doesn't respect civil rights?
You're going to have to ask them.
Yeah, right. But you agree that. But anyway, I think so. Fast forward, somehow this got you called a white supremacist.
And pretty much everything else.
And this is, to me, I think you're a hero, by the way. I mean, I think that you shouldn't rue the day that you did that interview. I think that these issues need to come up, and it's being talked about all over the country now.
It is.
Because you took that callow question, and it's forcing people to talk about it, and I think that's very, very healthy.
What's
You
the word
probably
callow
agree with me.
mean? What do we mean?
Immature.
Youthful,
Youthful, immature. Sort of bit
Callow.
ignorant.
Well,
Callow.
when I say
What does it really mean?
Shallow and
I
immature.
think he had been taught peddled a certain line in school, and he was just mindlessly repeating it, just to sort of get a rise out of me or trap me or somehow. I mean, that's what I mean.
But at the
by
bottom
callow.
of all this, don't you feel like a lot of the pushback comes from a real emotional place and not a considered logical place? Because it seems like from the outside, if I were to look at, when I read the article, I thought it lines up in some Socratic way. And if you approach it from a common sense perspective and you don't get emotional and you forget about the colors and you read what it says, it's not a racial argument. It happens to come from a place where whitey originated, but it's not a racial argument. It's an argument. Essentially, if I wrote like ways to get ahead, if we called it that, and then line that up, you'd have a bunch of people agreeing with everything you said. And then it becomes politicized once you said it in another context, which is bullshit. But okay.
Whoa.
Yeah. Well,
Sorry.
the fact that
Hey.
that something good came from a particular group of people historically in a
Yeah.
particular place, and even people of a particular race, seems to. Once again, I cannot reconstruct the way that these people think,
Right.
because it is so foreign to me.
Right,
This kind of illiberal, emotional. Logically sloppy reaction is very hard for me to even enter into.
Yes,
You-
I feel the same
Data
way.
is totally not
Data
respected.
is
No.
absolutely irrelevant.
But it is a racial issue in the following sense, I believe,
Right.
in that we're flailing about as a society trying to figure out how can we help the underclass
Right.
to stop being the underclass. And if the only way to help them is by helping them change their values, if they
Right.
can't be helped so
Right.
long as they maintain those values, which I read that, we're both friendly with John Haidt, and he had that Brookings report on poverty, and that came basically from the left, and it had basically the same conclusion.
Yeah.
Then everything else is just noise,
Yeah.
and a waste of time and a waste of bandwidth, and is going to fail and make the problem worse.
Hillbilly Elegy.
So it puts a lot of pressure on the racial question.
Well, it taps into this divide, and in academia, it's a very hot button question of whether, the lack of success or the difficulties of whoever is in difficulty in our society, and it's disproportionately minorities, whether that is due to sort of external forces that keep them from getting ahead, or whether it's due to more internal habits or frames of mind or culture or behavior. And there is a very strong aversion to allowing any suggestion that their behavior might be at the root of it. I think partly because then that means that programs and services and all the kind of, throwing money at the problem is not necessarily going to work.
Unless you're addressing the underlying behaviors and trying to alter them in some way.
And outsiders cannot necessarily do that.
No, they can't.
No, precisely.
Yeah.
My wife is I hate using this jargon. My wife's of color.
Yeah, right.
My wife is half Indian, half Puerto Rican.
Yeah.
And we argue about this sometimes. And I'm like, sweetheart.
She's wrong.
I know. I said, sweetheart, imagine we have 3 kids. Imagine we're raising those kids, but it's only you by yourself.
Yeah.
Now you imagine it without any money. Now imagine it in a bad neighborhood.
Right, yeah.
What could the federal government come in and do to help you? What could they possibly do?
Right.
I mean, if you
But
don't,
I
if you
know
don't have the
from a
resources to
first
get the kids to do their
person-
homework and be there,
I know from a first-person experience. I grew up in a junkyard in Jersey, and as soon as I got out of that environment, the value system shifted to the degree that my life shifted, because that which I had internalized was no longer working. And if we could contextualize what the professor is saying with what's being said in Hillbilly Elegy, what's interesting about it is that he's saying a lot of this, but criticizing the people he grew up with in Appalachia's kind of.
Ohio, right?
Ohio, something like that. And he's saying, and a lot of the criticism is that there is this self-mythologizing about hard work and all this, and essentially saying a lot of it's bullshit. The reason you have dental issues because you're drinking too much Mountain Dew. It's a cultural problem. It's not, nobody's done that to you. It's not an external. Long story short, he's being really critical about white people. If we could somehow communicate that in a fact-based kind of a communique without all of the color recognition, and just tell people, look at the model, look at the sort of facts and cultural components associated with some kind of success, regardless of what color you
Yeah,
are.
separate it from race.
Right.
Mm.
Yeah.
and by the way, it's not just in the races, because I mean, as an employer, I cannot find good employees of any color.
Right.
I
Well,
mean,
that's,
I
that's
really
something
can't.
That's happening right
That's
now
what he's saying
in the States.
Appalachian. They're
I'm-
saying,
it's
yeah.
stunning. I can't
Yeah.
find employees who are serious about work. I can't
Yeah.
find ones who can write a paragraph.
Right. Yeah.
This
It's
is
stunning.
a big issue that's about to break open. I think it's been percolating. Labor force participation for prime age men, that is working age men, the kind that always used to work, is at the lowest point since the Depression,
Wow.
and it's been declining. And I'm actually about to bring out an article in a journal called American Affairs, which is sort of this post-Trump journal that was started by this young editor from Harvard. He's maybe a third of my age. Anyway, it's about this really controversial issue, which is the relationship of these waves of low-wage, low-skill immigration to the fact that American workers are less and less able to do the job and are less and less desirable to employers. What's really happening is that businesses are replacing American native low-skill workers with people from abroad. We have this really dysfunctional equilibrium going on.
I read that immigrants are twice as likely to engage in some entrepreneurial endeavor, and American-born are twice as likely to go to prison. I mean, it wasn't broken down racially, but you're much more likely to be entrepreneurial if you've come here to work. And obviously, there's another problem with the type of when you whatever your screening process for people that are coming here. But it was a pretty damning statistic about what we're raising now, what the average American is up to, and how they're participating.
But it does lower wages. I mean, I presume it lowers wages, meaning like if I didn't have the access to the Mexican and foreign labor that I have, I'm sure I would have to start paying more to get to induce somebody to want to do the job. Now, even at twice the wage, the Mexican labor would be superior to the homegrown labor at half the wage.
Yeah.
Or worse than that. I mean,
Anthony Bourdain, said that in his Kitchen Confidential many, many years ago. His experience in the restaurant business, that he couldn't find Americans to do the job they do for twice the money.
like Tony, Tony. Tony worked for me for like 30 years. I cannot catch him not working.
Right.
Like I know he eats. I know he goes to the bathroom.
Right.
I know he's human.
You just can't catch him.
Literally, he has no supervisor.
Right,
He's nobody has to watch him. But I walk down there. He never knows when I'm coming. He is always working.
Right,
He's motivated from within. He says I'm at work.
Right.
And that's kind of like my father's generation. I'm not even sure I'm like that. Easier to be a boss than I see people working for him. Like I don't know if I could do that job.
Right. Yeah. I know what you mean.
I don't think I could.
Yeah.
I'm too entitled. I say why do I have to work this way?
Right.
I grew up, upper middle class in Westchester. I shouldn't be working like this.
Right.
So I can only imagine how the next generation feels.
Yeah.
Right. Well, this is definitely going on, and I would just say it's unsustainable. It
is
really
unsustainable.
is.
Yeah.
I don't know what we're going to do about it. You can read my article.
I will.
I'm writing it with a guy named Jason Richwine, who's a persona non grata. He was the guy who wrote this PhD thesis at Harvard, was working for Heritage Society. Some left-wing media type who was scrounging around found that he had said something about immigrants having a lower IQ, or low-skill immigrants from Mexico having a lower IQ. He actually provided the data in his PhD thesis, and the Heritage Society panicked and fired him, which I thought was very dishonorable of them.
You know, I found myself in a bind 2 weeks ago because we had a guest on, David Reese, and he referred to Charles Murray as a debunked racist. And I pushed back on that and immediately says, "Oh, so you think blacks are inferior?" I'm like, "No, I'm not, I'm just saying I don't believe he's been debunked." Just to say that he had not been, like, I hadn't seen him debunked.
Right.
Already he was trying to tar me as some sort of racist. And this is what's happening to you. And just to spread it out, because this is what's really been on my mind lately. With the whole, did you read Andrew Sullivan's piece about taking a knee in New York Magazine?
No, Andrew Sullivan's pieces are too long for me.
This one you would like. And Andrew Sullivan, of all people, he used to be, I guess, kind of conservative, but he's no right-winger anymore.
Right.
He went through all the data about the police shootings. And I've seen this, too, with Heather McDonald and the black Harvard economist. But inquiry after inquiry after inquiry, they're finding that it's not true that blacks are not shot more than whites. Now, and I said, I just want to be on the right moral side of this issue. I really, if they are shot more, and you can demonstrate it to me, I will not be meek about being outraged and wanting to see it fixed. But if it's not true, and I literally can't talk about it, so then we're raising these young black children to think that the police are going to shoot them down, which is a traumatic upbringing for any child. You have terrible division in the culture.
Yeah, it also reinforces a lot of the cultural attributes that are keeping people down in the first place.
And you can't even talk about it.
No, you
The
don't.
hostility to authority, which really is not a great thing for any
Oh, and it's
child
getting
to
cops
learn.
killed, by the way.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, and
Cops have
it's
been
getting
shot.
cops killed.
Yeah,
6 or 7 cops have obviously been killed because of this. I was so bitter, you probably were too, with Obama, because after they examined the Ferguson thing with Darren Wilson, and Eric Holder, nobody's racist, exonerated Darren Wilson. Do you think the president couldn't have gone on TV and say, "Listen, I know what I said, but we've investigated this. You trust me, Barack Obama."
Right, yeah.
In this case, I have to admit, this cop didn't do anything wrong. This guy is so concerned about healing the nation. On the truth, he couldn't get out there and say that.
Yeah.
And then Hillary has Michael Brown's mother on stage with her at the convention. The victim, right?
Yeah.
What are they doing?
I don't know, but the nature of identity politics is like a thought virus. After a while, it reinforces all kinds of...
All on lies. And Hillary knows it's a lie. Obama knew it was a lie. Do they think they're helping the nation or hurting the nation? That's what I really wonder when they're alone.
I know that they're hurting the nation.
I know they are too, but do they think? Does Obama not?
I think part of the problem is it's hard to know what these people are thinking. I mean, part of the mystery of what happened to me, and it's emblematic, or Heather McDonald is another example. She came and talked at Penn Law School last week and gave a lot of these statistics.
Did they let her speak?
Well, they had to have, it was basically a police lockdown. We had to create a police state on the Penn Law campus in order for her to come in.
At Penn Law, where they're learning the First Amendment.
Right.
It's infuriating.
It was, but she did get to speak. And she presented these overwhelming statistics to the students, and they were just sitting there trying to decide whether they would actually pay attention or just shut them out. I mean, I think they're so used to policing political incorrectness. That's the one thing they do best. They have what I call a PC, zapper in their mind.
Like a plug zapper.
If they see a thought coming,
anything anti-PC, they
1,000
buzz it out.
feet away, they have an exquisite sense that they have to stop that thought. It's Orwellian crime stuff.
Is high IQ correlated to anything worthwhile? I mean, no.
Apparently not.
I mean,
not in this regard.
This
No.
is Penn Law School, okay?
Yeah, of
These are
course,
not
I'm a little
jokes.
worried about it. I'm very worried. Yeah, you're just so much better at policing.
But
political incorrectness. You're so
statistically,
much better at it.
Statistically, if you're an educated person who's identified an ideology, you don't experience facts as countering that ideology. You just
I can't
screen.
accept
I'm telling you what the statistics are.
Okay. Sorry, Doug.
They,
sorry.
you screen the facts for things that will support your ideology, and that lends support toward that those statistics.
Yeah, but
your
I mean,
experience.
there are some positions where there are very few facts that support your ideology, and when you're confronted
But
with
that's how
something
crazy it is.
stark,
So maybe the first, how do you pronounce it? Bourgeois?
Bu-
bourgeois.
Bourgeois.
Maybe the first
Bourgeois.
I've only seen it written.
What, you don't use that term a lot?
No, I don't use it. Maybe the first bourgeois value we need to get back to
Yeah.
is respect for facts.
Yeah, so-
And
Respect for
allowing people
evidence.
and allowing people
Yeah.
to speak their mind, because it's all got to stem from that.
Or Socrates. I mean, this
Listening
goes
to
back
the
a ways.
facts.
Well, no, when I was a kid in law school,
Yeah.
the average law student would have been on the side of letting the Nazis march in Skokie.
That's interesting that you say that, because one of the things I was going to use in my Q&A for this big talk I gave yesterday, and I'm sorry I haven't brought my podcast of that because I'm very proud of the talk. It was masterful. Was that my dad was a card-carrying member of the ACLU. He was a second-generation Jewish immigrant and very proud of his country. And when the Skokie event happened, when the incidents at Skokie happened, I have a very vivid memory of it. My father knew people in Skokie, and he knew people who were Holocaust survivors. There were a lot of Jewish refugees living in Skokie at the time. And he said to me, I wake up every morning and thank God that I live in a country where the Nazis can march in Skokie.
That's right.
Wow.
Yeah, that was the
I
attitude.
thank God, yes. And that is an attitude that is so foreign to our students
Right.
today. I think because they really do not know the price of freedom. They don't know history, and they don't know that freedom has to be won and, cherished, preserved, protected, and defended in every age. It doesn't just fall from the sky. You really have to fight for it, and it's hard. It's bruising. It's difficult.
Are
it's
you
painful.
optimistic? Because
No.
when I read about when you
I'm
read
not.
How can you be?
No. Well, some people are more optimistic than others, but it's like there are all of these correlates. The trajectory of these great nation states like Rome. Like at first, there
Right.
were all of these attributes that lent themselves toward the generation of this dynamic society, and then before you know it, everybody starts to get soft, and then there's the bread and circuses era where they're describing creating these spectacles, throwing Christians to the lions, throwing a couple of, providing people with some bread and distracting people to the degree that they weren't concerned with the debacle that was their political system. And before you know it, Rome became no longer Rome, right? I mean, aren't there correlates now?
If you
It's
say
like-
so.
I'm telling you. Are you familiar with
We're gonna
that?
have
Those
to take his word for it.
are you, the bread and circuses
Rome
argument
died.
about Rome. Yeah, Rome died.
Well, I think we're in a really liminal time. When I say that, I mean I think we're at this inflection point.
Yes.
Almost, because on the one hand, and once again, we have to trust the academics to tell us this, and I don't really trust them. But that we have some very positive social indicators in a way.
Oh, really?
I mean, some of our numbers are good.
Like what?
For example, teen pregnancy rates are much lower.
Okay.
Now, that's the good news. The bad news is, and this is a bit of a trick, right? Out of wedlock birth rates are going through the roof. Well, why is that? Because all women are having babies later. So the whole out of
Yes.
wedlock thing is being driven by women in their 20s and
Right,
30s.
right,
So
right.
I mean, that part is not improving by any means.
Right.
But at least they're not having them at 15 and 16.
Right.
Well, okay. Crime rates are down.
Yeah.
And they're more focused on these pockets of
Yeah.
havoc.
Do you
Yeah.
believe the leaded
So-
gas theory?
What's that? No.
Yeah, I think there may be something to
Jonathan
Wait,
that.
Hyde-
explain it
but
to
I don't know
people
how
because
much.
people don't know what that means.
There's some correlation between the crime rates dropping
Mhm.
16
Lead
to 18
paint and
years
lead gas.
Yeah.
after
paint.
after
Mhm.
they got lead out of the environment of the various cities. So
Right.
apparently, if you look at when New York stopped leaded gas and lead paint, and you could see 16 to 18 years later, the crime rates of each city dropping. This is according to Jonathan Haidt.
Right.
But,
Which-
but
and-
on the one hand, on
which
the one
shocked me.
hand, it looks like crime rates are at least stabilizing. Although, as I said, there are places where they're quite astronomical. But on the other hand, and I get this from my son, who's sort of an amateur demographer, the number of people we have in jail now is many, many times more
Oh,
than,
right,
let's
right.
say, back in 1960, which is now they tell us that we've returned to those crime rates.
Right.
Now, here's
That's
the
important.
problem. If we let all the people out of jail to go back to the incarceration rates of the 60s, we
Yeah.
might be seeing a very different crime
the-
rate. So
Go ahead,
you
please.
have to look at all the whole picture.
That reminds me
Okay.
of the argument I had just an aside with somebody about they're comparing these white serial killers or mass
Yeah,
murderers
yeah.
to Muslim terrorism.
Right.
I'm like, okay, but
Right.
you have to also take into account we spend billions, maybe hundreds of billions of dollars to
Yeah.
foil Muslim terrorism. Let's compare the stats. If we didn't
Statistically, if you didn't spend any of it, there could be a billion.
if
Yeah,
they
how
had,
many
if
deaths
they
would
had
there
as
be?
much daylight in front of them as the
Yeah,
average
yeah,
white.
yeah. If you didn't
Well,
have a
mass
lock on the
murderer.
front door, yeah.
If they really got the over borders they wanted,
Ah.
and people could come from anywhere, we might see a very different picture. The Muslims we have in this country are a highly selected group of people. They're, not representative of the population. They're very patriotic. They're not. This is not mass migration that we have in this country right now for Muslims.
Right.
So I think people don't take that into account. So on the one hand, we have some numbers that look good. On the other hand, if we really take the full picture, they don't look so good. I think what keeps me up at night, what upsets me, and what I think is very ominous and bodes very ill for the future of this country, is the complete hijacking of our education system.
Yep.
The total and complete hijacking of our education
Could we
system by
define-
the
well, how do you-
progressive left
Oh, yes.
and their ideology.
Yeah.
They're grievance-based,
Yes.
victim-based.
My mother. She's describing my mother.
Identity.
My mother too. My
Ide-
mother's a Chomsky
Yeah.
leftist.
Oh, yeah.
She's a pussy hat.
She's a
that's
what?
what I
Yeah, the
call
pussy
them.
hat.
I call them pussy
In the
hats.
march, yeah. Yeah.
Uh,
Well, a lot of them are just anti-Trump. They don't know why they're. It's not really a political thing.
Well,
My
this
wife went down. It
preceded
was
Trump.
just.
I mean,
I got
Trump
you.
has
Okay.
made it a
anti-West.
lot
It's
I got it.
anti-Western.
It's anti-Western. Yeah.
Trump is what I call a totalizing experience. I mean, we now
Yeah.
we used to have divisions and disagreements. Now we
Yes.
have complete demonization.
Right. But look at what's going on.
You cannot say anything
That's right.
good
Anything.
about anything that the Trump administration does, or
Right.
you are an evil person to be cast out of
That's how
society.
emotional it's
I see,
become. And
yeah.
so now, when you write an article that if you would approach without tremendous emotionality, it would be hard to deny the underlying tenets of what's going on.
Well, I'm not denying them.
No,
I just
no,
think
I'm
they're
talking about the
dysfunctional.
people that
I think,
No,
oh,
the
they
people
find-
that are denying
They
them.
find a way to deny it. They find a way.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So Betsy DeVos is a good example because I was at a meeting sponsored by the Harvard Education School and Kennedy School. Actually, their board of advisors.
She's
I was asked
Secretary
to
of
talk to.
Education.
She's the Secretary of Education. And at this meeting, they were discussing a visit that Betsy DeVos paid to the Harvard School of Education. And then they did have to establish a police state to get her in there.
Yeah.
And she, barely got to talk. Her ideas 15 years ago were just ho-hum mainstream. Let's try some school choice. Let's try some charter schools. Let's try to break the monopoly of the public
unions.
school unions and the public school establishment and see if we can get a better result. Obviously, the unions always found that threatening for obvious reasons, but a lot of middle-of-the-road people or people on both sides of the aisle were behind at least trying this.
Including minority parents.
Actually, minority parents still are. But now it's poison. If Betsy DeVos wants it, it must be bad. So that really means we're backsliding, I think. And you can see it in the public opinion polls. So they showed some public opinion polls, 30 years ago, 20 years ago, and now how many people believe in school vouchers and support charter schools. And the numbers have just plummeted.
And they don't know why. These people answering, they don't know why they're against them or for them. They're just.
They don't. They really don't. And the fact is, quietly behind the scenes, a lot of minorities' parents are sending their kids to these schools. But the black community is very sharply divided because, of course, a lot of the black community, they know people or they are people who work for the public schools. They work for the public sector, so
Yeah.
they're very invested in that. On the other hand, they're not happy with the way their kids are being educated. So
I want to run a few things by you. First of all, when I went to Penn, I was a liberal. liberal, liberal, liberal.
Yeah.
And I can remember the first time I began to shift was at Penn when there was I don't know if it's still this way, there was law review. Half the people were chosen on grades and half the people were chosen in a writing competition. And so everybody wrote their essays, but then it leaked out somehow. Every student has a number, and the professor doesn't know you don't put your name on it. The professor doesn't know whose paper they're grading.
Right.
So they would grade all the papers. Then they send them to the registrar's office where they look up the numbers, and then they would consult your race. And depending on what race you were, they would add points to your paper.
Right.
And I was incensed by this. I'm like, what's going on here? We're in law school. Next year they're going to be in front of the judge. Like, at what point is the judge going to give them extra points? I said, I'm not.
Yeah.
And it literally began me sliding in a whole different direction. What made me think of that is this whole love of diversity. Yeah, there's no love of diversity of thought. Everything is about DNA, which made me say one time, well, maybe we should just start sending saliva samples with our scores to schools because that's what they really want. And then I know I'm jumping around, but then if you're Asian, and not that it matters, but Asians didn't have slaves. I mean, I don't think it matters that you're the same color as someone who did own slaves. But if you want to buy into that ridiculous thing, the Asians aren't even guilty of having ancestors who owned slaves in America. They need 400 points more on their SATs to get into it. How is that okay?
To prioritize a mosaic over just a meritocratic system?
So then let's just stop pretending we believe in this Martin Luther King content of your character. Let's just all admit we don't believe in the content of your character. Because in my stupid old-fashioned way, if Harvard became like 70% Asian, I would be very proud of my country. I'd be like, see that? What a great country. In America, it doesn't matter.
Right.
So I guess you agree with me.
I don't know what to say. A lot of these battles are still
But this all started
fought.
at Penn. Everything I'm saying started with my experience at Penn.
It's really interesting.
I mean, I was fighting the battles in the clerkship committee. I told an anecdote on Blogging Heads about this experience I had, and in a faculty meeting, one of my fellow faculty members called me out for being a racist because I said on Blogging Heads that I knew of no black students who were in the top quarter of the class. I said I knew of none, but I wanted to know if there were any.
Right.
So this related to my clerkship meeting. I was the clerkship committee is responsible for trying to get students at Penn Law clerkships. And one of the faculty members at the meeting said, I am very concerned there are no black students getting clerkships. There are no black students getting good clerkships. He says, I think that's discrimination. I said, now wait 1 second. I said, I have the perception, based on my experience, that black students are very rare at the top of the class. In fact, I've never seen any. Now, let me tell you something about judges, left, right, and center. They are the most grade-conscious and rank-in-class conscious people in the known universe. They will call you up and say, where does this person rank in the class? You know, are they 5th? Are they 10th? I said, so until I see a spreadsheet of where the black students in this law school stand in the class and what their grades are, I'm not signing on to the idea that they're being discriminated against. Well, they're not being discriminated against by us.
Right.
I'll tell you that. Well, the people at this meeting were very mad at me because I wanted to see the data. I wasn't willing to just sign on to
It
this
is
theory.
painful information.
Well, but you can't go
I
around
know.
accusing
I'm just
people.
saying.
If you don't want the information disclosed, don't accuse people
Who
of discrimination.
brought up the phrase "the soft bigotry of lowered expectations"?
Well, I know George Bush referred to it. I doubt that he came up with it, but I know he.
I was
he
just
kinda made
reading
it
Malcolm
famous.
Gladwell, who is, I think he's half black.
he's
One
half
of his
black.
parents are
Swaim,
black.
Barton Swaim came up with it.
Oh,
His
really?
Speechwriter. Well, he was one
Right,
of the
right.
speechwriters.
But Malcolm Gladwell's in David and Goliath, they cite statistics, and Malcolm Gladwell's half black, and he was saying at the upper levels of the law schools, he was talking about the affirmative action creating conditions where you end up getting into a better school than you would have otherwise, and instead of that being a net positive, you instead of float, you fall to a lower part of your class when in fact you would have been at an upper part of your class in a lower tiered school, and that does more to hurt the self-esteem and sort of motivation level of the participant in the program. So the question being, is the net result positive?
Well, it's called the mismatch hypothesis.
Is that what it's called? Okay,
yeah,
mismatch hypothesis.
But the problem
Okay.
with
So it's
that,
like your
I mean,
marriage.
I think it, right. No, the mismatch hypothesis I think is sound, and you see it in our own students who struggle, and it's kind of on some level really unfair to them, and I can't imagine what it's like to sort of slog through that uphill battle, but. On the other hand, I think what affirmative action is really for is not to help black people. It's for the vanity of white people.
Yeah.
I mean, they would just not be able to deal with it if they had a race-blind admission system and nobody came. And the problem is, given the gaps that continue to exist in test scores, in grades, in achievement, nobody really would come. I mean, there might be fewer any blacks at Harvard Law School or Yale Law School. And people say, well, we can't tolerate that. That cannot be. I think we could. We could bite the bullet on that.
Right, yeah, right.
I'm not sure. First of all, I think
there
that
would be a few, but there wouldn't be as many as people think there should be.
No,
of course.
I think that a lot of people really do believe affirmative action does good. They don't know the data. I'm saying I don't think it's just for their advantage. I think a lot of people think they are doing good when they advocate these programs.
I mean, I think they are, but they don't want to really find out.
Yeah, that's right. They don't want to find out.
They don't really want to find out.
And no,
and
you
maybe
would,
they are doing some. I mean, it's worth investigating. I mean, I think there are positives to affirmative action as long as it's not too dramatic. You see, if you really have to, if the disparities are really enormous, then it's very, very harmful. If they're small, there's enough noise in the system that I think that ends up working out. But also, it's a process of socializing blacks to, the norms of the broader society. Now, the problem is the norms of the broader society suck now. I mean, the norms that are sort of taught in selective universities just reinforce the worst tendencies of this kind of grievance mentality.
System,
That's the irony.
Well, in my experience of affirmative action at law school, I told you that, I don't know, we're like 7, 8 black kids in the class. Two of them, I can't even remember their names. I don't say the name.
Yeah.
Two of them were really, really bright. And one guy was editor of the Law Review.
Yeah.
And their class participation, for the most part, was indistinguishable. I mean, I don't know if they were in the top of the class or not, but it was indistinguishable from an above average student.
Right.
And then there were like 4 or 5 kids who just never knew the answer when they were called on, and by the time third year came around, they were gone.
Yeah.
It was clear from day one they didn't belong there. So what good did that do them?
Yeah.
And what was the effect on the 2 students who were very, very bright?
Right. Well, that's the mismatch hypothesis. Who now people are looking at they got there because.
That's right. Well, I see you here, but I don't know.
Yeah, of course.
How did you
know?
get this degree?
Right.
Yeah.
And that's
well,
human.
I think as a practical matter, we've tightened up a bit on affirmative action, so these problems are not as bad as they used to be. I'll tell you where the problem is really severe, though. In other words, we don't dip that far down into the pool.
Okay.
And make sure
and
that.
Couldn't you do affirmative action through sort of financial grants and stuff as opposed to just going, hey, we don't, we're gonna give you extra grades essentially?
Yeah. Well, the problem with that's been looked into is that there's so many more whites from lower
right.
quintiles
I see. So
that they would sort of swamp.
Gotcha. Right.
The blacks, and also even controlling for income.
Right.
Blacks get lower scores than whites. So. Blacks from families with incomes of $70,000 have lower scores than whites with families from $30,000.
Right.
I have to confess something.
Yeah.
I guess it's just the pressure of society. When you speak so, I'm sure it's accurate. I mean, it's stuff that I know is accurate, but you speak so matter of factly about these painful realities of race. I can see how people are off put by it.
Right.
And I don't know what the answer to that is.
In this climate,
answer,
everybody's
I
off
think,
put
is
by
that
everything.
It's
sort
harsh.
of
I'm
like
like,
being
oh,
autistic.
that
I
hurts.
do not have any racial guilt.
Yeah.
Now, I don't know why. I was sort
Yeah.
of born without racial guilt.
Yeah.
I don't feel guilty. I recognize objectively that what happened to blacks was horrible, but
Right.
they were abused. I'm not denying any of that at all. I just don't feel uh, somehow personally responsible to fix it myself. First of all, because I don't think anybody really can at this point fix it. I think the problems have shifted to a sort of internalized set of habits and norms that the people themselves have to fix. And sad, it's unjust, but I think that's the way it is. But also, I think if you take in the broad sweep of human history, you will see that there have been horrors, there has been suffering. Man has been a wolf to man in every age.
Mhm.
I
Without
read V.S.
minimizing what black people have suffered and the terrible abuses that
Read
they have
V.S.
suffered,
Naipaul.
people have suffered horrible, murderous, abusive
Right.
behavior for
Right.
century upon
Right.
century upon century.
Can I tell
And I think we have this victimization sweepstakes, going where if you don't say blacks are the winner, you're evil. Well, I'm not sure they are the winner.
Right. Right.
Terrible things have happened to people in all ages.
I've said to black friends, we're just discussing this. I said, if you could take all the souls that have ever lived on Earth
Yeah.
and put them into one of these lottery things, and you
Right.
could pick one at random, what do you think the odds would be that you could pick a better life than the one that you've actually
Well,
had?
Actually,
Right,
that's
right.
the other thing.
One in billions.
Right.
I mean, you could you
Right.
think, and now that's not totally fair because still you
Well,
want to be
there's a lot of relative
comparatively
aspect. It's relative. Right.
relative,
Yeah.
but still perspective is always
Right.
valuable.
Well, but there's a lack of gratitude. Well, that's society wide. I mean,
Yeah, sure.
gratitude is a bourgeois value. To just have
Yeah.
a perspective on how privileged you are, once again, over the grand sweep of history,
Right.
what kind of life you're leading compared to the life that billions before you have led, and also what has led to all of that wealth, all of that prosperity,
Right,
all of
right.
that peace and safety and privilege. And that gets back to the whole Western Civ thing, right? I mean, who gave us this life? Who's responsible for it?
Yeah, the inclination toward perspective isn't there, but with the human animal in general. I mean, it's something you have to kind of get that you earn. You have to earn perspective.
Right. Well, I mean, the other thing is you have to earn respect.
Yes.
So the other myth is that we can confer upon people the basis for other people's respect,
Right.
but we can't.
Right,
That
right,
sort of
right,
has to
right.
be earned.
And to be on the record and clear about it, it's still enraging to not be treated fairly,
Of course
no
not.
matter how good your soul is compared to the all,
But
all history. So I don't want to be
what you were
misinterpreted.
saying, V.S. Naipaul wrote this. I guess it was a memoir. The author, the novelist. He was an Indian guy, but had been shipped out to like the West Indies, somewhere to cut sugarcane for the British. And he talked about how brutal it was under British rule until the British left, and the black people on the island became the political power. And he said that he would take British rule
Well, right.
any day.
It's all comparative, isn't it?
It's all comparative, and then that goes to your point.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of mythologizing about colonialism. I mean, there is more stuff loaded onto colonialism than it
Right.
can ever bear. Somebody out at, now I'm forgetting the university, wrote an article within the past week, defending colonialism and saying it wasn't all bad.
Oh, he had to
the
retract it.
firestorm. Yeah, he
Yeah.
had to retract
I
it.
saw that.
I think this idea is abroad that because there are some bad things about an era or a culture or a people or a practice that tars everything, that taints everything. I mean,
Right.
that's just a fundamental logic error, I think.
By the way, it dovetails, and I haven't heard this talked about a lot, but in my experience, it dovetails with this immigration thing because as much as I am in love with the immigrant labor as a boss, it is clear to me that this is not a patriotic wave of new Americans. This is an anti-American wave of new Americans,
that's
and
right.
you've witnessed. I mean, people who become citizens, they have not a kind word to say about this country, as opposed to I'm first generation. My father came here when he was 8 years old. He loved this country. It didn't matter.
That's how I got the name melting
And he
pot.
experienced anti-Semitism.
Yeah.
But I mean,
Yeah,
his
so did my
eyes would
father, yeah.
water at anything about America, And we had Brett Stevens here, and I ran that by him, and he poo-pooed it. He said, "Well, a lot of Jews were communists. And I said, yeah, but I don't think that was the typical representation of the immigrant mentality. I think the immigrant mentality was hyper patriotic in my father's generation. But now you have cultures that were marinated in anti-Americanism who are not making a clean break from the old country anyway. It's not like picking up stakes and never to return.
Right. And they're encouraged in that. They're encouraged.
That's the part of the problem.
The elites. Here's the problem: is that the elites encourage that kind of anti-Americanism, that
Right.
grievance culture, that lack of patriotism, the propensity to find fault with the place that you've gone. Not really sitting down and thinking, why have I left the place where I came from? What's so great about it? Why am I attracted to this spot? What they have going for them? Maybe I should show a little admiration and gratitude. No, exactly the opposite. It's really a bizarre attitude, and it's bodes very ill for this country.
Well, that's what I'm. How does it all
Yeah,
play out? Does
it's
does
going
it
to
does it
play
come
out
out in the
very
wash?
badly.
I'd made the argument to people where they say, "Oh, it'll in a generational two, it'll disappear." I said, "Well, really? Until recently, we had the Voting Rights Act 100 years after slavery, because we know that white Southerners just keep on being racist. These attitudes die very, very slow. And you can say openly,
Yeah.
oh, you're a white guy from Mississippi. Oh, we suspect you of racist. And you're probably right. Or you could be right. I don't know.
Right.
But somehow these less desirable mentalities of immigrants, we're supposed yes, they throw homosexuals off the rooftops there, but by one generation they'll be totally fine with gay marriage.
Yeah, they'll be out of it. Right. Yeah.
Well, maybe not. Maybe they'll be like
Yeah,
white
sure.
Southerners. Maybe it'll be just as, or maybe it won't be. Again, I don't know the answer. My mind wanders there, and I want to talk to somebody about it, and I can't
Right.
talk to anybody about it, which I think is why you see white supremacist movements like Richard Spencer actually having more traction than they deserve, because a lot of people, we're, like showbiz types from Greenwich Village. We're not exactly the typical arch conservatives.
Yeah.
And we can't talk to anybody. The only people who talk openly about these kind of things, and they
Yeah.
also talk openly about hating Jews and blacks and all
Yeah,
that,
yeah.
are these white supremacists. So I've noticed a lot of people I know are very aware of what's being said on these websites.
Yeah.
I worry that they could slide into
Don't you
it.
think that? Listen, the election of Trump. I mean, if you were approaching this just without a lot of emotionality, and you wanted a conservative, that probably wouldn't have been the guy. A lot of the votes were generated by somebody who was willing to say something that wasn't politically correct, and the enemy of my enemy becomes my friend. And
That's
you
a good
whip
Muslim.
people. What's that?
That's a good Muslim adage. Enemy, my enemy.
Is that a Muslim adage?
Yes. Enemy,
Yeah,
my
but
enemy is my friend.
it's apropos in this regard. It's
Yes.
like you have a guy who, regardless of what he says or how crazy you think it is, when people get emotional, they would rather vote for somebody that says something not politically correct than somebody that they think may create policy that would be more productive. Because
Right.
productive policy is a sober consideration, and an emotional consideration is we got to build a wall. Maybe the wall is a thing. Maybe it's I don't know. But we're not really able to experience the argument in a Socratic way.
Can't talk about anything.
You can't talk about anything.
Nature abhors a vacuum. I mean, I think that there are
Yes.
these vacuums now where people with dissenting views in any respect cannot come together and talk about them openly. So they
Right.
have to flock to the places where they
Right.
get a little bit of relief.
Right? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, there is actually online a very intelligent sort of what I would call dissident right presence. There
Yeah.
are some really wonderful bloggers who
Yeah.
dissent from the orthodoxy of the progressive orthodoxy that you experience in a place like
Yeah.
this, or the Upper West Side, where you can go to a dinner party and somebody says something stupid like every single person who voted for Donald Trump is a racist
Yes,
without
of course.
exception.
Right. Yeah.
And you just sit there thinking,
Yeah.
what can I do with this person? But if
Yeah.
you're hearing that and nothing else, you
Yeah.
just get really frustrated. But the people who are
Yes.
online speaking intelligently and thoughtfully about some of these issues like immigration, about free trade, about what our foreign policy should be, but about trying to shrink government, whether the government is doing too much, about whether education policy is going anywhere. Those people don't have a lot of political power. They just have their little
Right.
blogs and their followers,
Right.
their Twitter accounts.
Right.
There's a whole community, but I think that community is so dissociated from power
Yeah.
that they're kind of out there like a flywheel.
But they're a more dialectic community, meaning you can be relatively socially progressive and at the same time have some common sense conservative
Yeah,
approach.
there is a true dialectic community out
Yeah,
there.
but
Of
we don't have a
mixed
dialectic
attitudes.
populace, right?
Well, in places like academia, which is where I live.
Yeah, you're not dialectic either
and
over there.
We are a monoculture.
Right.
I mean,
That's horrible.
you have no
Right.
idea how bad it is.
That's right.
You really don't. I will send you my my video, the video of my talk yesterday. But that's basically what I said. I said there are really key issues in our society that are critical to our future.
Yes.
Where the university has become irrelevant.
Yes.
There is only one
Yeah.
one opinion, and we have these
That's right.
vigilant communities sitting on the edge of their chairs,
Right.
sniffing out the slightest iota of political
Thank God.
incorrectness and calling it out.
There's a law
mean-
professor here.
I know. You saw the Dove ad, by the way, right?
What's that mean?
The Dove soap ad. With,
Oh no, I haven't
let's,
seen
let's,
it.
let's not
I
go into
don't-
it.
Oh,
then.
with the
Don't.
white turn, that was
Yeah, but it was a total fraud because they
Oh, is
they,
that
they
true?
selectively edited the rest of the commercial out. It was really just a black girl takes off
Yeah.
shirt. She's a white girl. Underneath,
Right.
she's a brown girl. And
Right.
apparently, in the full commercial, there's
Oh,
seven
so they
different
were doing
colors.
the whole
Oh,
rainbow
right.
thing.
They were celebrating
Gotcha.
diversity.
I see. They
Right,
were
right.
celebrating, but instead they doctored it.
Yeah, and now Dove is going to lose millions of dollars.
Oh,
So
right,
we pressure these companies to celebrate diversity. Then if they
Right.
don't do it exactly the way we
Right.
want
Right,
them to,
right,
we just
right,
come at them.
Right. Yeah.
So why would they do it?
Yeah.
And the ACLU,
It's backtracking.
they're caving, right? They're caving. Now the first thing was this.
That is ground zero for social decadence because the ACLU used to be
Right.
the sort of final stand firm bastion.
Can I tell you my analogy? Because I donated to the ACLU, and I said, well, the ACLU
Right.
is like a defense attorney. Before somebody is put in jail, or before an idea is, if the government can stop on an idea, it needs to have its best defense.
Yeah.
So I don't always agree with the ACLU, but I want everybody to have their best, and that's how I always felt the ACLU was.
Yeah.
That and they're not anymore. And if now
Right.
they're caving about these protests because they have a right to carry permit, this is, I mean, in a law school, I would imagine that argument would melt away in 10 seconds.
But don't you feel like there's going to be a domino effect with institutions in general, just like the ACLU?
Wait,
Yeah, go ahead.
Now, let me ask you about that. And then on this birth control thing. Now, I am not anti-birth control. And I actually want people to have birth control. But
I can't get enough of this stuff.
But when a nun feels that she's being forced to do something that violates her religion and the state is making her do it, isn't that like a clear case of when we should stop and say, wait a second, this may be something to talk about here. Maybe there's another way we can accomplish this.
Well, right. So it's so unnecessary. See, that's the key. It's so unnecessary because, I mean, first of all,
But the
people
ACLU
have-
came out for the birth control.
Right, have lost sight of the fact that if the government doesn't supply something for you, you can just go out and get it yourself. Well, let's just put that aside.
Right.
That idea is just so revolutionary.
Yeah, I don't give people their food and their housing. I just pay them a salary.
Well, we're heading in that direction.
I know.
But
Yeah,
yeah,
until
I
we
mean,
turn into Rome.
what is not there, I think, with the kind of foaming at the mouth progressive left is any spirit of compromise or restraint. I had a friend, a very respected friend, who teaches at Vanderbilt Law School. He's from an old Southern family, and he says, "Here's what my mother got off the bus with Hillary." He said because she said the Democrats, they just don't have any restraint, any sense that you don't push everything to the
That's right.
absolute limit in a pluralistic democratic society. You don't press your advantage to the ultimate end just because you can, because there are other people who might have views and sensibilities different from your own.
Enough to elect Donald Trump.
Yeah. Well, I mean, what it leads to is this kind of, frustration.
Emotional decision making.
Mary Poppins said, "A gentleman never presses his advantage.
Right. A
Forbearance is the
gentleman never
hallmark of their creed."
Forbearance is the hallmark of their creed. Oh, God bless.
Forbearance is the hallmark of the creed. I have to remember that.
That's really good.
Wow.
What
Yeah.
has
That's a good
happened to
one. Yeah.
forbearance?
Yeah.
You know?
So yeah,
I-
am I like, I don't remember my con law, but I'm just saying it seems to me there is a legit issue that the ACLU, they could have just stayed quiet on it. They came, what is the civil liberty that they're defending here by saying that the nuns have to provide birth control? What? This is just PR, right?
Well, and once again, I think, forbearance, they could have just stayed out of it.
Yeah, just stay out of it.
Sometimes just stay out of it. So that never happens. And, it's unseemly. I mean, on the one hand, I understand that gay people want equal respect in every single respect. I understand that they want that. On the other hand, they have to understand that they're not necessarily going to get it because they aren't actually the same as heterosexuals in some respects. They're sort of new on the scene. They're the new kids on the block. It is an untraditional idea. It takes some getting used to, and there are some religions that simply don't accept it. So, to be a mature human being is to realize that. So we've got to make that bakery us a cake. We absolutely have to.
She really
I
doesn't
mean,
mince words.
No.
This woman is not scared of anything.
Why would
No.
you want a bakery to make a cake for you? If first of all, you'd kind of be afraid what they put in it. But anyway,
No, the reason is because they want to make them do it.
they want to make them do it.
Yeah.
They just
Right.
want to make them
Yeah.
do it.
But I have those thoughts, and I say, well, what if it was a racial thing? We wouldn't tolerate it, So I have some sympathy for it, but I do agree with your broader point, which is that we are not. Some people are dealt hands in life that we're not going to be able to fix for them. I mean, gays. It's the least of it. Like transgender. I mean, no matter what we do, it's always going to be awkward to live life as transgender.
Right.
And it's not going to get any better by putting people in jail if they use the wrong pronoun or whatever it is,
Right. And I think we have gone a long way towards tolerance. We have gone a long way
which is a
towards,
good thing.
Towards yes,
Yeah.
towards understanding. But here's what I think they want. They want to flatten the moral landscape because
Yes.
we used to have a moral landscape where there were degrees of tolerance, more grudging, less grudging. We kind of kept our distance from things that we didn't necessarily totally approve of, either for aesthetic reasons or for moral reasons or for reasons that we couldn't really articulate. No, I think there are people now in society who want everything to be embraced 100% by
Yeah.
everyone. Everyone has to love them, right? They can't just
Right,
tolerate them.
Right.
And I think that is not a good society because those declensions, those degrees of distance from others are lost. And so the freedom to, quote unquote, discriminate, sometimes for good reason, against other people are lost. I mean, discrimination used to be a positive word, not a totally negative word.
There's also a genetic inclination toward a form of discrimination. I mean, you grew up in an environment where you had to create pattern recognitions, and we're not allowed to do that if it's called discrimination.
Well, right. We always prefer our own. And you see, there's an upside to preferring your
Of course.
own, which is that you take care of your own.
Yes.
You nurture your own. I mean, we really weren't designed to see a kid in Bangladesh as in every way equivalent to our own
That's
kid.
why
And I don't think we can ever
Social
do
psychologists
Peter-
will tell
Peter
you
Beinart.
ideal group size is 200
that.
people
Yeah, and
because
that doesn't
after
mean
that,
we go out and kill the person in Bangladesh.
right, right.
I mean, there are a lot of degrees in between. And the fact is, you mentioned race. Well, we wouldn't allow discrimination on the basis of race. Well, in fact, as a practical matter, we're a very segregated society. And upper middle class, well-off people are the most segregated people in the country.
Yeah,
They see nothing wrong with living in these lily-white enclaves.
sure.
Where when you go to a dinner party, they preach to you about diversity. I mean, I've always found that to be
I just had this at
strange.
a wedding I went to this week.
Yeah, yeah.
I went to Ted. I went to Ted Alexandro's wedding.
Yeah, sure.
Now he's Ted Alexandro. We love him.
Yeah, Ted's a great guy.
He's a real left wing guy. He's at Occupy Wall Street, whatever it is.
Yeah, he's a little confused.
No.
Yeah.
He's as nice as can be. But
Nice,
at
yes.
at the wedding, no, but he's not like a strident.
No, I know. I
that's
like
what I'm
Ted a
saying.
lot.
But
Yeah.
at the wedding, I only saw one black couple.
Yeah.
I'm like, this bastard. This guy's been preaching to me
Right,
all this
right,
stuff.
right,
In the meantime,
right,
at my wedding, it was like 50% black.
Yeah.
But my diversity was because I was a musician. It wasn't diversity for the sake of
It was
diversity.
organic.
This was just my life, you know.
Yeah,
So that's fine.
yeah,
But why should you have to go out and create it? But
yeah.
then this guy who has basically not a diverse life
It's ironic,
at all
yes.
is preaching it and ramming
Yes,
and will
right.
actually he sent me a thing of the Trump interns. And there was one black face among the Trump interns because Robert Reich said, I think there must be racism going on. I said, where are you going to find this was a guy who was polling at one point 0% in the black community, and everybody thought that was, when it was used as an argument against Trump, everybody thought that was credible. But then when he has only one black intern, that becomes evidence that the guy is racist.
Sure, of
well,
course.
where's he going to find these black interns?
It's all right
from
with
the 0% who supported him.
hypocrisy, right? I mean, all the New York Times op-ed pieces written by people that live on the Upper West Side, they're not really exercising their. You can get on the train and go to. I'm building a building in Bed-Stuy right now. Talk about capitalistic project. Well, I'll hire people from other races or whatever. But it's like, yeah. I mean, it seems.
Okay, but this I will say, and this is, we have to wrap it up. But this I will say where I think leading a diverse lifestyle does give you an insight, because as much as I don't buy or I have I respect the data on police issues.
Yeah.
I know firsthand that every black guy I know has a story about being humiliated by the cops.
Right. Yeah.
They may not be able to put in perspective and understand why that happened or what the crime rates or whatever. It doesn't really matter to them.
Right.
That's a huge social cost.
Yes.
And it needs to be kept in mind, even if you want to discuss it in a way that so they don't think you're a racist.
Yes.
It can't just be dismissed. When you have a big segment of the population
Right.
that really is under the thumb of the cops much more than another segment of the population, they're going to see things differently.
No, I think
And it
that's
needs to be
that's a
respected.
tragedy
agree.
in a way, and
I
it's
agree.
really driven by two things. One is that, there are a lot of cops who are not perfectly behaved,
No.
and not to the point of being, rogue cops or abusive. They just are maybe less restrained and considerate than they should be.
Well, they're
And even
cops.
Heather McDonald acknowledges that. But on the other hand, what some of the things they have to put up with, we probably are not familiar with. But here's what's driving it, is that we have scientific policing now, and what that does is it sends blankets high crime areas with cops. They're just everywhere. And where are those areas? They are minority
Right.
neighborhoods.
Right. Of course. yeah.
So the people in these neighborhoods are screaming for the authorities and the cops to do something about crime.
Right.
What they do is that they send a lot of cops in, and that means that there are just a lot of encounters
right.
between
Yes,
blacks
that's
and
exactly right.
cops.
You have a police force of angels.
Yes. Yes. Of course.
the crime rates being what they
just
are.
come
Yes,
into
yes.
contact constantly.
Constantly.
And what that means is a lot of black men are being stopped.
Right.
Now, I think that's probably somewhat overused, but and I'm convinced by the data in Philadelphia that we could have fewer stops and frisks, but it doesn't change the fact that these areas, these communities, there's too much crime. There's just too much crime. I don't know how else to put it.
No,
And until those crime rates
It's
come
undoubtedly
down,
the case.
you're not gonna make a dent in the murder rate in Chicago without pulling over a lot of innocent black
exactly.
men
Right.
wrongly. And
And
truth
make it a
is,
stereopticon where everybody's under observation all the time. So the original sin here is the black community committing too much crime, and until that solves itself, and I see it going in the opposite direction. These other subsidiary problems are not going to go away.
if I had been Obama during this whole police thing, I would have made a cause of a federal program to make sure that every cop was wearing a body camera. Like I was like, how can I really help this issue?
Right.
Because that would be huge. To try as much as possible that no interaction between the state and a civilian, a cop and a civilian, is up to anybody's word. That it's videotaped. And I know they could turn it off, but just turning it off is going to look suspicious. And you can get away with that maybe once.
Are
know?
there leading black?
and it costs nothing. So why are we doing
But
it?
here's the problem. Even encounters where blacks behave very badly, and as a result, things do not go well,
Mhm.
right? The black community is up in arms about them. So there was a
Yeah.
Temple student who was shot in Florida this week, 22-year-old girl. who rammed her BMW into a police car, practically ran over the guy. Well, nobody forced her to do that, right? And they shot her dead.
Yeah.
And so people are screaming about that, but nobody says, well, wow, why did you run over this cop?
Right. Yeah.
Right, but to be
Yeah.
fair to them, they're receiving that new incident within the misperception of this is another innocent person being slain by the cops, and it's happening all the time. Like if they, I feel a couple of things. I feel if the cops were more polite, it would go a long way, because people would be ready to see a cop as a bad apple if their typical interaction with cops was not as it is. But I know I got pulled over by a cop and shoved up against the wall, and he was very rough with me.
Yeah.
And I was the owner of the restaurant he shoved up against.
Right. Right.
And if I had been black, there would be no way you could convince me it wasn't because of my color, because I wasn't doing anything.
Right.
So they
well,
are.
I've been stopped by cops too, and I'm a female and I was just speeding or whatever. But
Were you hooking?
Gal's got to make a couple of bucks now.
Sorry.
It's not that kind of podcast. No.
No, so
they
I
weren't very nice to me.
no, so as much as I think that we all agree about, I think what's really going on. I am always I always have a little sympathy, because of course they're going to react that way, because this is what they're
all
fed.
a self-fulfilling, self-reinforcing.
This is confirmation bias.
It's
That's right.
confirmation
it's a
bias.
self-reinforcing
Yeah.
cycle. It's a
Yeah.
right dysfunctional cycle.
It's also like I remember when they pulled Saddam Hussein out of that little, what do they call it, a rabbit hole?
Whatever it is,
Yeah.
the hole in the
Yeah,
ground. Yeah.
I felt bad for him. Like it was
Right.
Saddam Hussein, But
Right,
when you see somebody getting shot or suffering,
Right.
whatever it is, humanly, it's hard to. No, they deserved it.
Right, yeah.
It just
Yeah.
it plays on you.
It plays on your
It's
humanity.
visceral.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I give it a little.
Yeah.
All right. I think we need a social norm of people being able to talk about things.
Well,
That's
good luck. Good luck with
No,
that.
But I really, that's why I wanted you on the podcast. Or I really think that your incident is important. I mean, the fact I sent it
It's
around to a lot of people.
wonderfully
People are talking
important.
about
It's
it
great.
around
I
here.
can't wait to send
I mean,
this
you made the
out.
Comedy Cellar. We've talked about your
Yeah.
issue.
Right.
Yeah.
Comedians, a lot of comedians have read about this. Because it came through me,
Yeah.
and we can't be totally unique. I'm sure all over the country this is happening.
Well, the comedians are endangered
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
everything they say, it's a minefield.
Mm-hmm.
It's almost as bad as being a law professor. And that's the death of comedy, of course. It
Yeah.
is. If you can't transgress and push the envelope,
Right.
it's hard to be funny.
Yeah, Nero. Well, I'm waiting for Nero to play as the city burns. It's I don't know. I'm not very optimistic. I think.
Professor Wax, we're at it more
Yes.
than an hour, and I don't want to keep you any longer. I'm so happy to meet you, and
Yeah.
anything I can do to spread your word,
Yeah.
I will do.
Yeah, me
well,
too.
You're in ground zero.
In the name
There
of
we
free
go.
speech, and it's not in the name of agreeing with everything that she
Of course,
said.
it's free
in the name of
speech.
being able to discuss stuff.
We have to be able to discourse,
We
for
have to be able
God's
to talk
sake.
about
That's
it.
what the
Like-
the what do they call that? The when an empire. What things are built on the bedrock, the foundation. Like the Socratic method, the idea of a philosophical discourse as being inherently good for some productive kind of social situation, a city, a country.
Yeah, well, in science, we respect double-blind experiments because we know that everybody has
Right.
terrible bias, right?
Yes.
Not in social sciences. It's okay.
Okay, well, thank you.
Anything else, Stephen? Thank you very much, everybody.
Thanks,
Good night.
everybody.
I guess you didn't know what you were coming into. You might have thought you were coming into the Lions Den.
Well, I've come into so many Lions dens. You are no longer a practicing lawyer.
I never
You
practiced.
never were.
I worked as a summer. I took the bar, but I never practiced.
Noam's a world-class musician. You got to see him play. Really, really something.
But I liked law school a lot.
Well, because you think you didn't want to practice.
All the lawyers I met that were practicing were too unhappy for me.
Yeah.
Anyway, yeah, nice to meet you all.
Yeah, nice to meet you.
Are you sticking
I
around
will-
for a drink?
I will, well, if I can, for a while.
No, that's what I said.
Half an
Yeah.
hour.
Let's go. I'm not on until 10:40.
Oh, what time are you
Oh,
on?
Deb is going on stage.
I'm not on until 10:40.
Ne-
No, it'll be a while.
By the way, you should see her resume. She's a scientist too.